invitation that breathed. My name is Maya, and until last week, I believed that fear was a simple, understandable thing. The jump scare in a movie, the sudden bark of a dog in the dark. I didn't know it could be a slow, creeping vine, wrapping around your sanity and squeezing until the world you knew simply crumbles. It all started with the envelope. It was lying on my welcome mat on a Tuesday, a stark, cream-colored rectangle against the gray concrete. There was no stamp, no postmark, no address. Just my name, Maya, written in a spidery, faded ink that looked like it had been scratched onto the paper with a nib dipped in rust. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Inside, a single card held only 7 words. "The house misses you. Come home." Below it was an address I'd never seen before, on a street I was sure didn't exist in our city. I threw it in the trash, chalking it up to a bizarre marketing ploy. But that night I dreamt of the house. Not as a picture, but as an experience. I felt the chill of its shadowed foyer on my skin. I saw its winding staircases, mahogany banisters twisting up into a oppressive darkness. And in a sunroom I'd never seen, a wooden rocking chair moved with a steady rhythmic creak. 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 Though no one was sitting in it. I woke up gasping, the sound still echoing in my ears, the phantom smell of dust and dried roses clinging to my nostrils. For 3 days the compulsion grew. It was a whisper at the back of my skull, a magnetic pull in my bones. I'd find myself staring out the window, my fingers tracing the address I'd memorized onto the fogged glass. My rational mind screamed in protest, but it was a distant, feeble sound, like a radio playing in another room. On the 4th day, I got in my car. I don't even remember making the decision. My hands simply turned the wheel, navigating streets that seemed to blur and rearrange themselves until I was there. The house stood at the end of a cul-de-sac overgrown with skeletal trees. It was a Victorian monstrosity, all gingerbread trim and turrets, but it wore its age like a shroud. The paint was blistered and peeling, and the windows were dark, vacant eyes. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. Every instinct told me to flee, but my feet carried me up the weed-choked path to the heavy oak door. It was unlocked. The air inside was thick and still, heavy with the scent of old wood, decay, and something else. Something metallic and coppery, like old blood. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light cutting through the grimy windows. I took 1 step over the threshold, my sneaker whispering against the dusty floorboards. Thud! I spun around. The front door had slammed shut with such force that the walls shuddered. I grabbed the tarnished brass knob, yanking and twisting, but it wouldn't budge. It wasn't locked. It was fused as if the wood had grown together. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at my skin. That's when I noticed the walls. They were moving, not in a dramatic way. It was a subtle rhythmic pulse, a gentle expansion and contraction. I placed a trembling hand against the floral print wallpaper. It was warm, and I could feel a slow, deep thrumming beneath it, a vibration that traveled up my arm and settled deep in my teeth. A soft, wet, squelching sound emanated from within, the sound of a living, breathing thing. The house was breathing. I was standing inside a living, breathing organism. "No," I whispered, the word swallowed by the oppressive silence. A new sound began, slithering up from the gaps in the floorboards. It was a whisper, but not from a single voice. It was a chorus of them, dry and rasping, layered over one another. "We've been waiting." I backed away, my back hitting the now sealed door. Tears of pure terror welled in my eyes. "Let me out." "Come home," the whispers hissed, seeming to come from every direction now. The walls, the ceiling, the very air itself. "You are here." "You are home. This isn't my home," I screamed, my voice cracking. The pulse in the walls quickened. The squelch, squelch, squelch of its breathing grew louder, more eager. The whispering coalesced into a single chilling sentence that slithered into my ear and coiled in my brain. "The house has chosen its new organ." A searing, white-hot pain lanced through my chest. I cried out, clutching at my sternum, feeling my heart beat a frantic, runaway rhythm. Except it wasn't just my rhythm. It was syncing with the pulsing of the walls. Lub-dub, squelch, squelch. My vision swam. I stumbled away from the door, collapsing to my knees in the center of the foyer. The warmth from the walls intensified, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. I don't know how long I lay there, trapped in that horrific syncopation, my own life force being tuned to the house's macabre symphony. When I could finally move, the front door was open. Just a crack. A sliver of gray evening light cut across the floor. I didn't question it. I scrambled on my hands and knees, hauling myself through the opening and tumbling out onto the cold, hard ground. I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs burned, until I collapsed in my own driveway. I thought I was free, but I'm not. I sit here now, in my sterile, modern apartment, and I can still feel it. A faint, persistent thrumming in my bones, a ghostly echo of that terrible breathing rhythm. The city sounds outside are muffled, distant. All I can hear clearly is the memory of those whispers. And the worst part? The compulsion is back. It's stronger now. A deep cellular yearning. This apartment feels wrong, alien. It doesn't have a pulse. It doesn't have a breath. My suitcase is lying open on my bed. I'm not packing clothes. I'm just getting ready. Because I know with a certainty that chills my soul that this is no longer my home. The house is waiting. It's lonely for its organ. And soon, very soon, I will have to go back. The Foundation's hunger. My name is Liam, and I'm speaking to you from a motel room 30 miles from what we used to call our home. The police report lists our case as a missing person, our cat, Whiskers. They think we're a young couple cracked by the stress of a new home and a lost pet. They don't understand. We didn't lose him. The house took him, and if we hadn't run when we did, it would have taken us too. We bought the old Henderson place for a song because no one else would touch it. It had been on the market for decades, a hulking Queen Anne with sagging porches and windows like dead, dusty eyes. Chloe saw potential, a project for us to pour our love into. I saw a bad investment, but the price was right. And her smile as she turned the key in the lock for the first time made my reservations feel small and cynical. The first night, we camped out on a mattress in the living room, surrounded by boxes, eating pizza and laughing about our future. The silence was the first oddity. No crickets, no rustle of leaves from the ancient oaks outside. Just a thick, absorbent quiet that seemed to swallow our voices. Then around 2 a.m. the sound began. It came from deep below, a low, rhythmic crunch. Grind, crunch. It was the sound of a quarry machine chewing through granite, a vibration we felt in our teeth more than heard with our ears. I grabbed a flashlight, my heart thudding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. Probably just the pipes, or the foundation settling, I told Chloe, whose face had gone pale. The basement door was a slanted, heavy thing that always stuck. I yanked it open, and a wave of cold, damp air washed over us, carrying a smell like wet clay and old bones. The beam of my flashlight cut through the absolute black, illuminating a cavern of dust-covered junk and cobwebs so thick they looked like ragged curtains. The sound was louder down there, echoing off the stone foundation walls. We crept down the rickety wooden stairs, the crunch, grind, crunch seeming to come from every direction at once. But there was nothing, no machine, no animal, no collapsed section of wall, just the oppressive cold and that relentless gnawing sound. We fled back upstairs, and I slammed the door shut, leaning against it as if to barricade us from the nothingness we'd just witnessed. That was the beginning of the change. Within a week, we noticed the slant. A marble would roll, unpushed from the kitchen counter and travel slowly, deliberately, across the floor until it bumped against the basement door. Our coffee mugs would slide an inch to the left if we set them down. The entire house was developing a list, a subtle but undeniable tilt, pulling everything towards that damned door. Pictures on the walls hung at increasingly jaunty angles, no matter how many times we straightened them. It felt like being on a ship slowly sinking into a whirlpool. The morning we lost Whiskers was the morning I truly understood we were in danger. We woke to an eerie silence. The grinding had stopped. The house was holding its breath. We found the evidence in the hallway. 4 parallel lines of tiny frantic scratches leading from the living room to the base of the basement door. The door itself, which was always cold and damp to the touch, was now warm. Not room temperature warm, but unnervingly, biologically warm like skin. I threw the door open. The darkness below was absolute, and the smell that rose was different now. Hot, metallic, and sickly sweet, like a butcher's shop on a hot day. The grinding started again, but this time it was faster, wetter, a sound of satisfaction. We called for Whiskers until our voices were hoarse, but only the echo of that chewing sound answered us. We packed a bag that day, our movements frantic and silent. We didn't speak. We just knew. As I carried the last duffel bag to the car, I glanced back at the house. I saw it then, what we had missed in our focus on the interior. The gutters, the downspouts, the patterns in the wood, they weren't just decaying. They were forming a pattern, a grotesque, fleshy texture. The veins in the wood grain seemed to pulse faintly. The house wasn't a structure haunted by ghosts. It was a living, hungry thing, and its stone foundation was its jaw. The grinding was the sound of it eating, slowly consuming the very land it was built on, and now it had developed a taste for something more. We drove away and never looked back. We told the police a sanitized version, too afraid to sound insane. But I know the truth. I feel it in my dreams, in that grinding sound that sometimes echoes in the silence of this motel room. The house is still there. It's always hungry. And a house that has tasted blood, even the blood of a small, innocent cat, will not stay satisfied for long. It's waiting. Its foundation is always hungry. The previous tenant's loop. My name is Alex, and I am a prisoner of a moment I did not live. This isn't a ghost story in the way you think. It's not about something that haunts you. It's about becoming the haunt itself. It's about the chilling discovery that the past isn't just something that happened. It's a record, skipping, forever replaying the same terrible track. And I'm the new needle. It was the rent that sold me. A sprawling, decrepit Victorian on the edge of town for the price of a studio apartment. The landlord, a shifty man with nicotine-stained fingers, handed me the keys and mumbled something about previous tenants not working out. I should have asked what he meant. I should have run. But I saw the high ceilings and the ornate, if rotten, woodwork, and I saw a project, a future. I didn't see the trap. The first week was peaceful. The house was silent, save for the groans of old timber settling. That silence, I now know, was just the calm before the hellish precision of the storm. It began on the 8th night. I was plunged from a deep sleep into heart-pounding wakefulness. The digital clock on my bedside table glowed 3:17 a.m., and then I heard it. A woman's sobs, raw and guttural, choked with a despair so profound it felt like a physical weight in the room. And underneath the crying, a frantic, scraping, scratching sound. Scritch, 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 scritch. It was coming from inside my bedroom wall. The sound was unmistakably that of fingernails on plaster. It was the sound of someone trapped, desperate, trying to claw their way out. I sat frozen, my blood turned to ice water, until the sounds ceased as abruptly as they began, exactly 15 minutes later. The silence that returned was heavier, tainted. This happened the next night. 3:17 a.m., sobbing, scratching, and the next. And the next. My life became a countdown to that terrible witching hour. I stopped sleeping, staring at the clock, dreading the moment the digits would click over. The lack of rest was making me hollow, a shell of a man. The despair in those sobs was infecting me, seeping into my own bones. I fought back with reason. I called a contractor, a burly, no-nonsense man named Dave. He tore a small hole in the plaster and lathe, shining his flashlight into the cavity. "Nothing but dust and mouse shit, son," he grunted. "No wires, no pipes. You're hearing things." But he couldn't explain the cold that radiated from the wall. A deep, marrow-chilling cold that defied the summer heat. Desperation drove me to the paranormal. I hired an exorcist, a frail woman who smelled of sage and sorrow. She walked through the house, her hands trembling. "The sorrow here is structural," she whispered, refusing to even enter my bedroom. "It's not an entity you can remove. It's a groove worn into the very fabric of this place. I'm sorry." She left without taking my money. I was alone. The sounds were breaking me. I started having waking dreams, flashes of a woman with ragged nails and tear-streaked cheeks, her mouth open in a silent scream. I felt her panic as my own. Finally, I decided on evidence. If I couldn't stop it, I could at least prove I wasn't insane. I bought a high-definition night vision camera, set it on a tripod facing my bed, and pressed record before I fell into a fitful, exhausted sleep. The next morning, with trembling hands and a mouth dry as dust, I plugged the camera into my laptop. The footage was stark and green-tinted. There I was, tossing and turning. The clock in the corner of the video read 3:16 a.m. My pulse thundered in my ears. 3:17. On the screen, my sleeping form went perfectly still. Then, with a jerky, unnatural motion, like a marionette on strings, my body sat up. My eyes were wide open, but they were vacant, glassy pools of absolute terror. A low, guttural moan escaped my lips, a sound I never knew I could make. It deepened, twisting into the exact soul-shredding sobs of the woman I heard every night. I watched, paralyzed with a horror so complete it was a kind of death. As my own body swung its legs over the side of the bed, I walked with a stiff, shuffling gait towards the wall. I raised my hands, and with a frantic, animalistic desperation, I began to claw at the plaster. Scritch, 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 scritch. My fingernails tore and bled, leaving dark, smeared trails on the white wall. The weeping was unbearable. A symphony of utter hopelessness played through my own vocal cords. It lasted exactly 15 minutes. Then, the figure that was me and wasn't me stopped. It turned, shuffled back to the bed, and lay down, resuming the exact position it had started in. The sobbing ceased. The loop was complete. I vomited onto the floor. The truth was far worse than any ghost. I wasn't a victim of a haunting. I was a performer in it. The previous tenant's final tormented moments were a recording, and my life, my body, was the medium on which it played. Every night at 3:17 a.m. I become her. I live her despair. I claw at her wall. I can't leave. I tried. I got in my car and drove 50 miles, checking into a cheap motel. But at 3:17 a.m., I woke up on the floor, my fingers raw and bloody, scratching at the garish floral wallpaper. The loop doesn't care about location. It's tied to me now, so I've come back. I sit here in this decaying house waiting for the clock to tick down. I'm not Alex anymore. I'm just a vessel, a recording waiting to play. And I know with a certainty that claws at my sanity more than my fingers ever could at that wall, that someday a new tenant will move in. They'll hear the sobbing and the scratching every night, and they'll set up a camera, hoping to prove they aren't crazy. And they will see me. They will watch me become the ghost. And the loop will continue. Something wears grandmother's skin. The inheritance of my grandmother's house was supposed to be a blessing. For a freelance writer like me, the sprawling old property nestled in the pines was a sanctuary, a quiet place to work and to grieve. The grief was a fresh, sharp thing. Nana had been my anchor, her death a sudden storm that had left me adrift. Moving into her home felt like wrapping myself in the last remaining blanket of her presence. I should have known that some blankets, no matter how familiar they smell, can suffocate you. The first signs were comforting, or so I told myself. The scent of her signature perfume, white shoulders, would waft through a room long after I'd aired it out. It was a ghost of a smell, there and then gone. Then came the sounds. The distinct rhythmic creak, creak, creak of her rocking chair from the sunroom when I knew I was the only soul in the house. I tiptoed to the doorway, my heart a frantic bird in my chest, only to find the chair still, a layer of dust on its oak arms. I chalked it up to the house settling, to the phantom limbs of my own grief. The mind plays cruel tricks when it's lonely, but the loneliness began to curdle into a persistent low-grade dread. The house felt less like a sanctuary and more like a vessel holding its breath. The silence in the pine forest outside was absolute, as if all the birds and insects had agreed to give this place a wide berth. The air inside grew heavy and still, the scent of white shoulders becoming cloying, like flowers on a coffin. Then one night, I saw her. I was coming out of the bathroom. The hallway before me, a tunnel of deep shadow punctuated by a single nightlight near my bedroom door. And there, at the far end, stood my grandmother. She was silhouetted against the moonlit window of the sitting room, wearing the same lavender chiffon nightgown I'd helped bury her in. A wave of such profound, dizzying relief washed over me that I had to steady myself against the doorframe. She was here. It was all a terrible mistake. She was fine. Nana, I whispered, my voice thick with tears. She smiled. It was her smile, the one that had comforted me through childhood fevers and broken hearts. But in the monochrome gloom, it looked fixed. A little too wide. Sarah, she said. And it was her voice, the gentle, papery rasp I loved. I took a stumbling step forward, wanting nothing more than to fall into her arms, to feel that everything was going to be okay. That's when she took a step towards me. My blood froze in my veins. The movement was all wrong. It was a jerky, stilted motion, as if her joints were being manipulated by strings held by an unskilled puppeteer. Her left foot dragged slightly, her shoulder hitched up, and her head lolled for a fraction of a second before righting itself. It was the movement of something that had studied human walking but had never quite mastered it. I stopped dead. Nana, what's wrong? Her smile didn't falter. If anything, it widened. stretching the skin around her mouth until it looked like taut, polished parchment. The corners of her lips crept closer to her ears, revealing too many teeth, all of them seeming just a little too long and sharp in the dim light. "Come give me a hug." "Child," it crooned. And this time the voice was a grotesque parody. It was layered like two people speaking at once. Nana's gentle tone over a deeper, gravelly, and deeply hungry one. The words themselves were wrong. They were what something thought a grandmother would say, but they lacked the genuine warmth, the history. They were empty, predatory. My body was screaming at me to run, a primal alarm bell clanging in every cell. I backed away, my back hitting the wall beside the bathroom door. The thing wearing my grandmother's skin took another jerking step forward. The scent of white shoulders was now overpowering, mixed with a new, underlying odor, the smell of damp earth and something sour, like old meat. "I need to remember what warmth feels like," it said, its head tilting to an impossible angle. That's when its hand, Nana's delicate veined hand, rose towards me. But the fingers twitched and spasmed, the nails elongating, darkening, becoming chitinous and sharp, like the legs of a massive insect. I didn't scream. The terror was too absolute, too silencing. I spun around and fled, slamming my bedroom door and shoving a heavy dresser in front of it, my breath sobbing in my chest. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the corner, listening. I heard it, the jerky shuffling footsteps stopping outside my door. The sound of long, hard nails slowly, patiently, scratching back and forth across the wood. And underneath it all, that horrible layered voice, humming a lullaby Nana used to sing to me, now twisted into a monstrous, hungry drone. I escaped at first light. I'm in a motel now, writing this down. The police won't believe me. They think it's a nervous breakdown. Maybe it is, but I can still smell her perfume in my hair. I can still hear that jerky shuffle in the silence between my heartbeats. And I know, with a certainty that has hollowed me out, that the thing in my grandmother's house is still there. It's wearing her face, her skin, her nightgown, and it's still hungry. It's still trying to remember what warmth feels like, and I was so close to giving it a reminder. The house that grew a family. My name is Mark, and I thought I was giving my daughter a fresh start. After the divorce, all I wanted was a quiet, stable place for Lily and me to heal. The cottage was a miracle, or so the realtor said. Quaint, 2 bedrooms, a picket fence, and a price so low it felt like a clerical error. Motivated seller, she'd said with a tight smile. I should have asked what was motivating them to practically give it away. From the moment we carried our boxes over the threshold, the house felt welcoming. It was more than just clean and bright. It felt attentive. The perpetual chill of a Pacific Northwest autumn never seemed to penetrate the walls. The heater would click on with a soft sigh moments before I even felt the need to adjust the thermostat. When I misplaced my keys, I'd find them later, not where I'd frantically searched, but placed neatly on the kitchen counter, next to my wallet, which I also hadn't realized was missing. It was unnerving, but in a world that had recently felt so chaotic, the quiet order was a sedative I willingly took. Lily, who had been so withdrawn since we left the city, blossomed. At 6, her imagination was a vibrant thing, and she quickly claimed the entire house as her kingdom. Within a week, she had an invisible friend. I dismissed it as a healthy coping mechanism. But the details began to crystallize. His name is Thomas, she announced one evening, coloring at the coffee table. He has a funny mark on his arm, like a strawberry. That's nice, sweetie, I'd said, only half listening. He says he used to live here. He says he's happy we came. He was lonely before. A cold finger traced a path down my spine. I did a quick internet search that night, my fingers clumsy on the keyboard. The local digital archives had a small scanned article from 1972. A boy named Thomas Miller, age 7, had vanished from this property. The article described him as freckled with a distinctive strawberry-shaped birthmark on his left forearm. The police had found no trace. The case went cold. My blood turned to slush. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe Lily had seen an old photo somewhere. Maybe the realtor had mentioned it. But the realtor's smile had been too bright, her answers too vague. I started looking at the house differently. Its warmth felt cloying, its attentiveness smothering. The way it seemed to anticipate our needs felt less like hospitality and more like curation. The final piece of the nightmare fell into place on a rainy Tuesday. I was making dinner when I noticed Lily was silent. I found her in the living room, standing perfectly still before the old family portrait that had come with the house. It depicted a stern-looking couple from a bygone era and their 2 children, a boy and a girl, all frozen in formal, unsmiling poses. "Lily, what are you looking at, honey?" She didn't turn. Her small finger rose and pointed at the painting. "That's my new brother and sister and mommy," she said, her voice matter-of-fact, devoid of childish whimsy. A jolt of pure, undiluted dread shot through me. I crossed the room, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked at the painting I'd passed 100 times. The stern couple was still there. But the 2 children? They were different. Their features had softened, their hair lightened. The boy now had my hazel eyes, and the girl had Lily's delicate chin. And there, standing between the 2 Victorian-era adults, were 2 new figures. One was a man, tall and slightly slouched, with my tired eyes and my receding hairline. The other was a little girl with Lily's blonde pigtails and her favorite blue dress. It was us. Our faces were rendered with a soft, serene expression, but our eyes held a silent, desperate plea. They were trapped, painted into a family that wasn't ours, bound to a home that wasn't our own. The brushstrokes were seamless, as if we had always been part of the composition. I stumbled back, a cry catching in my throat. I grabbed Lily and fled to the car, driving aimlessly through the rain-slicked streets for hours. But a strange pull, a deep cellular yearning, began to tug at me. The car felt cold and alien. The world outside felt hostile and loud. All I could think about was the warm, quiet embrace of the house. The way it knew what we needed before we did. We eventually went back. What choice did we have? The house was waiting. The porch light a benevolent, watching eye. It was warmer inside than I'd set the thermostat. A cup of tea, steam gently curling, was sitting on the table next to my favorite chair. Lily now talks about Thomas and her new sister in the painting as if they are in the next room. She seems happier, more content than I've seen her in years. And I feel a strange peace settling over me. The frantic worry about bills, the ache of the failed marriage, the fear for the future. It's all fading, replaced by a deep, placid calm. I spend a lot of time now looking at that painting. Our faces look so peaceful. Our pleading eyes don't seem so desperate anymore. They just look patient. The house isn't haunted by ghosts. It's haunted by the idea of a family. It was lonely, you see, and now it's almost finished its collection. It's growing its family. And soon, I think, very soon, we won't just be living in this house. We will truly be part of it. Forever. The keyhole glitch. The apartment was a steal. That should have been the first warning. A spacious 1-bedroom in a historic building with original crown molding, hardwood floors, and these beautiful, ornate brass keyholes on every door. Most people would have called them outdated, but to me, Emma, a freelance graphic designer with a weakness for vintage charm, they were the main selling point. Each one was a tiny, intricate masterpiece, a little window into the building's gilded past. I'd never felt safer, more settled, than I did in those first few weeks. The heavy skeleton key security, a comforting ritual in a world of digital passcodes. The first glitch happened on a Tuesday. I was heading to the kitchen for a late-night glass of water when a flicker of movement caught my eye. It was from the keyhole of my bedroom door. Not from the other side, but from within the keyhole itself, a faint shifting light like a dying television channel. Curious, I knelt and pressed my eye to the cold brass rim. I didn't see the hallway. I saw my bedroom. But the perspective was all wrong. It was as if I were looking from a point high up in the far corner, near the ceiling. My bed was there, the comforter rumpled from my earlier restlessness, and in the bed, lying perfectly still, was me. Or almost me. This other Emma's hair was stringy and damp-looking. Her skin had a sickly gray pallor, and her eyes were wide open, fixed on the door with a stare of pure, petrified horror. She was staring right at me, right at the keyhole. I jerked back, my heart seizing in my chest. The hallway was dark and still. I fumbled for the key, my hands trembling so violently I could barely fit it into the lock. I threw the door open, the wood crashing against the stop. The room was empty. The bed was empty. The only sound was the frantic thudding of my own heart. I told myself it was sleep deprivation, a trick of the light, a waking dream. But the image of that gray, terrified face was burned onto the back of my eyelids. It became a morbid addiction. Over the next few days, I found myself drawn back to the keyholes, a prisoner to my own dread-fueled curiosity. The keyhole in the bathroom showed a version of my shower curtain streaked with what looked like dark, rusty mud, the air thick with steam that smelled of wet earth and copper. The one on the linen closet revealed not stacks of towels, but a cramped, dark space where a hunched, shadowy figure seemed to be breathing slowly, rhythmically. Each glimpse was a little worse, a little more detailed, a little closer to a reality that was just slightly off-kilter from my own. The colors were always desaturated, the air thick with unseen particles. It was my life, but filtered through a nightmare. I stopped using the keys. The act of unlocking a door felt too much like an invitation, like I was validating its twisted logic. The final door was in the attic. I'd avoided the cramped, dusty space since I moved in. The door was smaller than the others, set into the hallway ceiling with a pull-down ladder. Its keyhole was the oldest of them all, tarnished, almost black. I had to know. I had to see what it would show me. I pulled down the ladder, the rusted springs screaming in protest, and climbed into the stifling, hot darkness. The single bare bulb did little to push back the shadows that clung to the eaves. I walked to the center of the space, the floorboards groaning under my weight. Then, driven by a compulsion I no longer fought, I turned and looked back at the attic door in the floor, and I knelt, and I put my eye to the keyhole. The perspective was dizzying. I was looking up into the attic from the hallway below. I saw the exposed rafters, the dangling light bulb, the dust motes dancing in the stale air, and I saw my own back. I was watching myself from below as I knelt at the keyhole. The sight was so profoundly wrong, so spatially impossible, that a wave of vertigo washed over me. The fabric of my reality was not just bending. It was tearing, and then the figure of me in the keyhole began to move. It wasn't a sudden jerk. It was a slow, deliberate, unhurried motion. The Emma on the other side of the keyhole, the one whose back I was watching, slowly began to straighten her knees. She was rising, and then, with a terrible grinding slowness, she began to turn around. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I was frozen, a spectator to my own doom, watching the horror approach from both sides of the brass ring. As the figure turned, I began to see the curve of a cheek, a strand of hair, the hint of a shoulder. A scream, silent and trapped in my constricted throat, was building. My hand clutching the attic key went numb. The key slipped from my sweat-slicked fingers. It hit the wooden floor with a sharp metallic clink, and from the other side of the door, from the hallway keyhole I was still staring through, I heard it. An identical, perfectly synchronized clink. The figure in the keyhole stopped turning. It was now half facing me, and in the dim light from the attic bulb, I could see that its eye was wide, its mouth open in a silent scream of reciprocal terror. It was just as frightened of me as I was of it. I scrambled back from the door, falling onto the dusty floor, gasping for air. I don't know how long I lay there. I finally stumbled down the ladder, slammed it shut, and have not looked through a keyhole since. But sometimes, late at night, I hear things. A faint shuffling step on the other side of a door. A soft rhythmic scratching at the brass. I never ever open them, because I can't be sure which side I'm on anymore. I can't be sure if I'm the one who dropped the key or the one who heard it fall. The guardian in the walls. My name is Jake, and I've always had a problem with pride. It's what made me buy the house on Hemlock Lane. The Blackwood House, the locals called it. A century-old Victorian that had seen more suicides and disappearances than any other property in the state. It was a dare, whispered over beers with friends who thought I was all talk. "No one lasts a night, Jake," they'd sneered. So I maxed out my credit card, bought it for a song from a terrified elderly executor, and moved in with a single air mattress and a cooler of cheap beer. I was going to be the legend who tamed it. The first night, the silence was the first opponent. It wasn't peaceful. It was a thick, heavy blanket that seemed to smother sound. I fell into a fitful sleep on the air mattress in the bare living room, the musty smell of decay and old dust clogging my nostrils. I was jolted awake by a sound that had my heart trying to claw its way out of my throat. It was a frantic, skittering scrabbling from inside the walls. It sounded like 100 rats with claws of broken glass, racing in a panicked frenzy between the studs. I sat bolt upright, my breath caught in my chest. And then a voice. It wasn't heard with my ears, not really. It was a guttural, wet whisper that seemed to form directly in the center of my mind, a thought that wasn't my own. "Get out. He's coming," I laughed. It was a shaky, forced sound, but I did it. "Nice try." I yelled into the empty darkness, my voice echoing in the vast empty space. "Pranksters in the Walls original!" "You'll have to do better than that." The scrabbling ceased. The silence returned, feeling even heavier than before.
I spent the rest of the night with every light on, a baseball bat in my hand, convinced I'd called their bluff. The second night, the atmosphere had changed.
The air grew cold, a deep penetrating chill that my sweatshirt couldn't fight. The scrabbling started again around midnight, more urgent this time, a constant frantic rustle behind the floral print wallpaper. The whisper came again, sharper, strained. "You didn't listen. He's here. Don't make a sound." I clenched my jaw, refusing to be intimidated. Then I heard it. Downstairs, a heavy, deliberate thud, then another. Something massive was walking through the rooms below. I heard the splintering crack of wood as a door was thrown open. My bravado evaporated, replaced by a primal, ice-cold fear. The footsteps found the stairs. They weren't the patter of an animal or the light tread of a person. They were the footsteps of something immense, each footfall a concussive blow that made the old house tremble. The china cabinet I'd found in the dining room rattling violently. Boom, boom, boom. It reached the top of the stairs. The hallway floorboards groaned under a terrible weight. I watched, paralyzed, as the doorknob to my room began to jiggle. Then it rattled, violently, the brass fixture screaming in its housing. The door itself began to bulge inward, the old wood groaning, thin cracks appearing around the frame. A smell washed under the door, the stench of old meat left in the sun, of open graves and stagnant water. I was going to die. I knew it with an absolute certainty. Just as the door was about to shatter, the scrabbling in the walls erupted. It was no longer frantic. It was a frenzied, snarling riot. It was the sound of a pack of wolverines defending their kill, a cacophony of claws and teeth and pure, unadulterated fury. It was focused, directed at whatever was outside my door. The thing in the hallway let out a roar. It wasn't a sound of anger, but of frustration, of fury denied. It was a deep, earth-shaking bellow that made my teeth ache. The pounding on the door stopped. The heavy footsteps retreated, pounding back down the stairs with a speed that belied their size, the stench receding with them. Silence fell. A profound, ringing silence. I slid to the floor, trembling, tears of terror and relief streaming down my face. I huddled there for what felt like an hour, listening to the blood pounding in my ears. Then a final whisper seeped through the plaster. It was gentle now, but thick with exhaustion. "You're safe for now. He's still hungry." That's when I understood. The entity in the walls, the thing I'd dismissed as a threat, wasn't the monster. It was the warden, the guardian. It was the only thing standing between me and the other thing, the real horror that hungered in the bones of this house. I still live here. My pride is gone, replaced by a grim, terrified gratitude. I don't sleep much. I leave offerings now. Raw meat from the butcher, which is gone by morning, vanished from the plate I leave in the pantry. The scrabbling is a constant, comforting presence, a reminder that my guardian is on patrol. I hear the heavy footsteps some nights pacing the halls below, a low, hungry growl rumbling through the floorboards. But it never gets up the stairs anymore. The guardian sees to that. I am a prisoner, but I am a living one. I don't know what the thing in the walls is or why it protects me. I don't know how long its strength will last against the hunger outside my door. All I know is that every morning I wake up alive, I whisper a silent thank you to the walls. And I pray to any god that will listen that my guardian never gets hungry too. Did you enjoy these bone-chilling tales? If you're craving more original narrated horror stories, I'm ready to write them for you. Comment, write more stories. Below. Have a specific theme or a fresh nightmare idea? Just let me know and I'll craft a new story from your prompt. Your next favorite horror story is waiting to be told.